The notification on Ethan's phone didn't make a sound, yet it screamed louder than any argument ever could. Transfer complete. Balance. Zero teacher. While his wife Elena slept soundly in the master bedroom of their Chicago penthouse, her phone likely still buzzing with messages from a man she thought Ethan didn't know. Ethan realized that bankruptcy wasn't just financial, it was moral. He didn't wake her up to scream. He simply packed a bag, understanding that the loudest revenge is sometimes a quiet exit followed by a decade of silence. If you find yourself drawn to the quiet storms that happen behind closed doors and the long, cold road to redemption, stay with me as we unravel this story. Chapter 1. Liquidity. The blue light of the laptop screen was the only thing illuminating the living room of the penthouse on Michigan Avenue. It was 2:14 a.m. on a Tuesday, a time when the city outside was a low hum of distant traffic and wet pavement. Inside, the silence was heavy, pressurized, like the air in a submarine just before the hull breaches. Ethan Caldwell sat on the edge of the beige Italian leather sofa, his posture rigid. He wasn't looking at pornography, or sports scores, or work emails. He was looking at a number. $0. He refreshed the page. The browser icon spun for a heartbreaking second before settling back on the same reality. The joint savings account, which had held the down payment for the house in Lake Forest, the safety net for their future children, and the cumulative results of his last 5 years of 60-hour work weeks, was empty. Transferred to J. Thorne LLC. Ethan closed his eyes, the name burning behind his eyelids. Julian Thorne. He didn't need a private investigator to know who that was. Julian was the man Elena claimed was just an investor for her art consulting firm. Julian was the man who drove a vintage Porsche and always seemed to have a hand on the small of Elena's back at cocktail parties, a touch that lingered a second too long. A touch Ethan had forced himself to ignore for the sake of being a supportive husband. A floorboard creaked upstairs. Ethan looked up at the ceiling. Elena was up there, likely sprawled across the Egyptian cotton sheets, sleeping the deep, untroubled sleep of someone who believed they had gotten away with it. He stood up, his knees cracking slightly. He felt a strange physical sensation, not rage, but a hollowing out of his chest, as if his internal organs had been transferred along with the money. He walked to the kitchen island where her phone lay charging. It lit up with a preview message. Julian, done, funds received. Leave him whenever you're ready, babe. No rush. Ethan stared at the text. No rush. They were discussing the demolition of his life with the casual patience of someone waiting for a table at a restaurant. He didn't scream. He didn't grab a kitchen knife. He didn't storm upstairs to shake her awake and demand answers. The societal script for a betrayed husband demanded a scene, wailing, throwing clothes off the balcony, the catharsis of noise. But Ethan was an analyst. He dealt in risk and projection. A confrontation now would result in gaslighting. She would blame his work hours, his emotional distance, his lack of spark. She would make him the villain of his own tragedy. If he stayed, he would become a character in her drama. If he left now, he retained the only thing she couldn't transfer: his narrative. Ethan walked to the front closet. He bypassed the expensive Rimowa luggage set, a wedding gift, and pulled out his old gym duffel bag. He moved quietly through the penthouse, a ghost in a home he had paid for. He packed 3 suits, his laptop, his toiletries, and the framed photo of his mother. He left the expensive watches. He left the tablet. He left the life he thought he wanted. In the kitchen, he took off his wedding band. It was platinum, heavy, and cold. He placed it directly on top of her phone, obscuring the screen so the next time it lit up with Julian's name, she would have to move the symbol of her marriage to see it. He opened the banking app on his phone one last time, taking a screenshot of the zero balance. Evidence, not for court, but for himself. A reminder of what love cost when you invested in the wrong person. Ethan put on his coat and walked to the front door. He paused, looking back at the spiral staircase leading to the bedroom. He could almost hear her breathing. "Keep the change," he whispered to the empty room. He opened the door, stepped into the hallway, and let the heavy latch click shut. The sound was final, like the closing of a vault. 3 weeks later, Ethan sat in a studio apartment in Uptown that smelled perpetually of boiled cabbage and old damp drywall. The room was a box, barely 400 square feet, lit by a single flickering fluorescent bulb that hummed like a dying insect. It was a violent contrast to the marble countertops and floor-to-ceiling windows of the life he had exited, but this box had one advantage. It was his. His phone vibrated on the cheap particle board table. It was the third time that hour. The screen displayed a private number, but Ethan knew it wasn't private. It was American Express, or perhaps Visa. The joint cards, the ones Elena had maxed out in a frenzy of revenge spending the day after he left, were now screaming for attention. He let it ring. He didn't have the money to pay them, and he didn't have the energy to explain that he wasn't the one who bought a $5,000 vintage chandelier or booked a weekend suite at the Waldorf. His lawyer, a tired man named Mr. Henderson who worked out of a strip mall, had advised him to file for bankruptcy. "It's a clean slate, Ethan," Henderson had said, shuffling papers stained with coffee rings. "Swallow the pride. She took the liquidity. You can't squeeze blood from a stone." Ethan picked up his phone, but not to answer the call. He opened Instagram. It was a form of self-harm he had developed recently, checking the narrative being spun in his absence. There she was, Elena. The photo was artfully composed, black and white, showing her looking wistfully out of a rainy window. The caption was a masterclass in victimhood. "Sometimes people leave just when you need them the most. Learning to stand on my own 2 feet. Had new beginnings. Survivor." The comments were a chorus of sympathy from their mutual circle. People Ethan had hosted for dinners, people whose investment portfolios he had managed for free. "So brave, Elena. You deserve so much better. I always knew he was cold. You're better off, darling. Let us know if you need anything. Wine night soon?" Ethan felt a bitter laugh catch in his throat. Survivor. She was surviving on the $200,000 she had wired to Julian's shell company. She was standing on her own 2 feet in the penthouse he was still technically paying the mortgage on, though the foreclosure notices would start arriving soon. He scrolled down. The next post was from Julian Thorne. It was a photo of 2 glasses of champagne against the blurred backdrop of a first-class cabin. No caption, just a location tag. Paris, France. The timing was impeccable. While Ethan was eating instant noodles in a room where he could touch the bed and the stove at the same time, they were toasting to their heist at 30,000 feet. He threw the phone onto the mattress. The injustice of it felt physical, like a weight pressing down on his lungs. The world didn't care about the truth. It cared about the story. And Elena was a beautiful woman with a tragic story of abandonment. He was just the boring, numbers-obsessed husband who had walked out. The nuances of the bank transfer, the infidelity, the betrayal, those were details too complex for a social media caption. A siren wailed outside, close and piercing. Ethan walked to the small window. The glass was cold against his forehead. Below, the city moved on, indifferent to his ruin. He had 2 choices. He could go online, post the screenshots, expose the affair, and engage in a muddy public war that would likely end with him looking petty and vindictive. Or he could endure this. He looked around the dismal apartment. A pile of unread mail sat on the floor, final notices, legal threats, demands. It looked like the wreckage of a life. But as he stared at the papers, his analyst brain kicked in. This wasn't wreckage, it was data. It was a balance sheet that needed to be corrected. He walked over to the table and opened his laptop. He didn't open social media this time. He opened a spreadsheet. He typed a header. Phase 1, stabilization. He wasn't going to fight Elena in the court of public opinion. He couldn't win there. She had the charm, the tears, and the audience. He had to fight her in the only arena where feelings didn't matter, where charm couldn't cover a deficit, and where the only thing that counted was the bottom line. He would let her have the narrative. He would take the reality. Ethan's fingers hovered over the keyboard. For the first time in weeks, the crushing weight in his chest lightened, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. He deleted the bookmark for her Instagram profile. "Enjoy Paris, Julian," he murmured to the empty room. "I'll see you when you land." The office of Blackwood Capital was less of a financial firm and more of a boiler room. Located in the basement of a nondescript building near the Chicago River, it smelled of stale coffee, toner ink, and desperation. There were no views of the skyline here, no ergonomic chairs, and certainly no receptionists offering sparkling water. Ethan sat across from Silas Blackwood, a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite and cigarette smoke. Silas didn't read resumes, he scanned them for weaknesses. "You're overqualified," Silas grunted, tossing Ethan's CV onto a desk cluttered with foreclosure files. "Caldwell. I remember that name. You were at Merriweather and Finch. Senior analyst. You handled the fusion energy portfolio." "I did," Ethan said, his hands folded calmly in his lap. He was wearing his second-best suit, the one that hadn't been dry cleaned in a month. "So what are you doing in my dungeon?" Silas leaned back, the springs of his chair groaning. "Guys like you don't come down here unless they're running from the SEC or a bad divorce. Which is it?" "It's a restart," Ethan said, his voice steady. He didn't flinch. "I need to work. I don't care about the title. I don't care about the office. I care about the numbers." Silas narrowed his eyes. "We deal in garbage here, Caldwell. Distressed assets, toxic loans, failing businesses that the big banks, your old friends, vomit out. It's not pretty. It's digging through trash to find a gold tooth." "I'm good at finding things people missed," Ethan replied. He reached forward and tapped a thick file on the corner of Silas's desk. It was marked Red Line Logistics, Liquidation. "That trucking company. You're about to sell off their fleet for scrap value to cover the lien." Silas raised an eyebrow. "So?" "I glanced at their filings while I was waiting in the hall," Ethan lied smoothly. He had actually researched the company for 6 hours the night before at the public library. "Their fleet is worthless, but they own the land their depot sits on in O'Hare's industrial corridor. The zoning laws changed last month. That land is worth 4 times the debt." Silas went still. He looked at the file, then back at Ethan. The air in the room shifted. It wasn't an interview anymore. It was a transaction. "You're hired," Silas said, lighting a cigarette despite the no smoking sign on the wall. "Commission only. You eat what you kill. No base salary." "Fine," Ethan said. For the next 6 months, Ethan Caldwell ceased to be a person and became a machine. He arrived at the basement office at 6:00 a.m. and left at 10:00 p.m. He didn't socialize with the other brokers, a rough crowd of hustlers who spent their lunch breaks betting on horses. Ethan's world shrank to the glowing monitors. He found peace in the binary nature of the work. Assets were either performing or non-performing. Liabilities were mathematical facts, not emotional betrayals. Unlike his marriage, the numbers didn't lie. They didn't smile at you while texting someone else. They didn't drain your account while you slept. He lived on black coffee and cheap sandwiches. He moved out of the studio and into a slightly better one-bedroom apartment. But he kept it sparse. No decorations, no distractions. One rainy Tuesday in November, a notification popped up on his newsfeed. It was unavoidable. Elena Vance's Lumina Gallery grand opening, a triumph of modern art. Ethan's cursor hovered over the link. His finger twitched. It would be so easy to click, to see the photos, to see her in a designer dress, holding Julian's arm, laughing with her head thrown back, spending the money she had stolen from him to buy her way into relevance. He could feel the phantom pain of the wedding ring he no longer wore. The urge to check up on her was a physical ache, an addiction withdrawal. He wanted to know if she was happy. He wanted to know if she ever thought about the man she left with nothing. Across the office, Silas yelled something about a margin call. Ethan looked at the news link one last time. Then he moved his mouse. He didn't click open. He clicked block source. He turned back to his spreadsheet. He had found a mid-sized regional bank, Sterling Trust, that was over-leveraged on commercial real estate. It was a small crack in their armor, invisible to most, but glaring to him. "I see you," Ethan whispered to the data. He wasn't building a life anymore. He was building a weapon, and he was just getting started. 7 years is a lifetime in finance. It is long enough for a bull market to turn into a recession, for a tech startup to become a monopoly, and for a man to completely hollow himself out and refill the void with cold, hard ambition. Ethan Caldwell stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of his corner office on the 42nd floor of the One North Walker building. The view of Chicago was breathtaking, a grid of light and steel stretching into the dark waters of Lake Michigan. He didn't look at it with wonder. He looked at it with ownership. He adjusted the cuff of his bespoke charcoal suit. He was 40 now, but he looked younger and harder than the 32-year-old who had walked out of his marriage with a duffel bag. The softness around his jaw was gone, replaced by the sharp angles of a man who ran 5 miles every morning at 4 o'clock a.m. His eyes, once warm and trusting, were now discerning instruments that assessed value and risk in milliseconds. The gold lettering on the glass door behind him read, Caldwell Holdings, Private Equity and Asset Management. Sir, his assistant, a sharp young woman named Sarah, spoke from the doorway. The board is ready for the Sterling Trust portfolio review. Give me a moment, Ethan said. His voice was quiet, but it carried an authority that made people stop and listen. He turned back to his desk. On it lay a glossy lifestyle magazine, Chicago Social. He hadn't bought it. Sarah had flagged it because it mentioned a person of interest in their risk analysis software. He opened it to page 42. There was Elena. She was still beautiful, but the camera was unforgiving. It caught the tightness around her eyes, the slightly forced nature of her smile. She was standing in her gallery, Lumina, but the crowd behind her looked thin. The headline read, Is the Party Over? The Changing Face of Chicago's Art Scene. The article was polite but damning. It spoke of shifting trends and liquidity concerns. It mentioned that her partner, Julian Thorne, had recently stepped down from his venture capital firm amid strategic restructuring. Corporate speak for being fired or bought out before a scandal hit. 7 years ago, seeing her face would have sent Ethan into a spiral of grief. Now he felt nothing but a mild analytical curiosity. She was just another asset that had depreciated due to poor management. He closed the magazine and dropped it into the recycling bin. Let's go, Ethan said, walking past Sarah. The boardroom was freezing, kept at a temperature that discouraged leisurely meetings. 10 senior partners sat around the mahogany table. They were sharks, but they all looked at Ethan as the apex predator. Sterling Trust, Ethan began without preamble, taking his seat at the head of the table. They are exposed, heavily. Their commercial real estate portfolio is underwater, and their private client loans are delinquent. They're a legacy institution, Ethan, one of the older partners, Marcus, warned. Buying them is hostile. Their client list is complicated. Old money, high maintenance. I know the client list, Ethan said, his eyes scanning the digital dossier on the screen. That's why I want them. He tapped a key, and a list of Sterling Trust's top 50 delinquent accounts appeared on the main screen. These were the high net worth individuals who were living on credit lines they could no longer service. Ethan's eyes stopped on row 7. Borrower, Vance Thorne Group, Lumina Gallery. Status, 90 days past due. Collateral, personal real estate, penthouse, Michigan Ave, and commercial lease. Ethan didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply stared at the line item. The penthouse, his old penthouse, the one he had walked out of. Julian and Elena were living there on borrowed time and borrowed money, and the bank that owned their debt was about to be owned by him. It wasn't fate. It was just good business. They are over-leveraged and undercapitalized, Ethan said, his voice flat. Sterling Trust is trying to hide these bad loans to avoid a downgrade. If we buy the bank now, we buy the debt. We control the terms. It's aggressive, Ethan, Marcus said. Ethan stood up. The market rewards aggression, Marcus. It punishes sentimentality. Prepare the offer. I want Sterling Trust by the end of the quarter. He walked out of the boardroom, leaving silence in his wake. As he returned to his office, he looked out at the city again. Somewhere out there, in the lights of the goal, Elena was likely pouring a glass of expensive wine she couldn't afford, complaining to Julian about the unfairness of the economy. She had no idea that the man she had discarded was about to become the architect of her reality. Ethan sat down and opened his laptop. He had work to do. The headquarters of Sterling Trust on LaSalle Street smelled of old varnish, mothballs, and the distinct acrid scent of panic. It was a Saturday morning, 2 weeks after Caldwell Holdings had finalized the acquisition. The lobby, usually a hushed cathedral of commerce with its marble floors and vaulted ceilings, was now cluttered with moving boxes and IT technicians running cables across the reception desk. Ethan Caldwell walked through the chaos with the calm stride of an occupying general. He wasn't wearing a tie. He wore a fitted black cashmere sweater and suit trousers, a look that was both approachable and intimidatingly modern against the bank's dusty, oak-paneled aesthetic. "Mr. Caldwell?" a breathless voice called out. It was Mr. Abernathy, Sterling's longtime director of risk. He was a man in his 60s who looked as if he hadn't slept since the merger was announced. He clutched a leather folio to his chest like a shield. "We weren't expecting you until Monday. The transition team is still migrating the servers." "I prefer to see the raw data before the migration sanitizes it, Mr. Abernathy," Ethan said, not slowing his pace. He headed straight for the executive elevator. "I want the red list, the physical files." Abernathy scurried to keep up. The red list? Sir, those are highly sensitive client relationships. Many of those accounts are merely experiencing temporary liquidity issues. We have understandings with them." "Understandings," Ethan repeated, the word tasting like ash. "Is that what you call 90 days past due and zero collateral coverage?" They reached the top floor. The executive suite was silent. Ethan walked into the main conference room where stacks of files were waiting to be digitized. He didn't sit down. He stood at the head of the table and held out his hand. "The Vance Thorne file. Bring it to me." Abernathy hesitated. His face flushed a pale shade of gray. "Ethan, Mr. Caldwell, Elena Vance is, well, she is a fixture in the community. Her gallery is a cultural institution. Foreclosing on her would send a very aggressive signal to our other high net worth clients." "She isn't high net worth, Mr. Abernathy," Ethan said, his voice dropping an octave. "She is high net debt. Bring me the file." Abernathy complied, pulling a thick, cream-colored folder from the bottom of a stack. He placed it on the mahogany table with a trembling hand. Ethan opened it. The paper trail was a tragedy of errors. It detailed a series of increasingly desperate loans taken out over the last 3 years. A second mortgage on the penthouse. A business line of credit for the gallery that had been maxed out to pay for renovations, which the receipts showed were actually travel expenses and luxury car leases for Julian Thorne. Ethan traced the numbers with his finger. He saw the dates. He saw the signatures. Elena's signature was shaky on the most recent documents, a sharp contrast to the confident loops he remembered from their marriage certificate. She was drowning, and Sterling Trust had been handing her anchors instead of life rafts, afraid to offend a socialite. "She missed the restructuring deadline last week," Ethan noted, reading the notes in the margin. "Yes," Abernathy admitted. "She called. She said she was waiting for an angel investor to close a round. She asked for an extension. I was planning to grant it on Monday." "You won't," Ethan said. He closed the folder. The sound was a soft, dull thud in the quiet room. "Sir?" "The extension is denied," Ethan said, looking up. His eyes were clear, devoid of malice, devoid of pity. They were the eyes of the market itself. "The covenants have been breached. The grace period is over. I want you to issue a notice of acceleration. Call the loan, all of it, due in 30 days. "She can't pay that," Abernathy whispered. "It will bankrupt her. She'll lose the gallery. She'll lose the home." "Then she should have read the fine print," Ethan said. He picked up the file. "I'm taking this. I will handle the correspondence personally." "You personally?" Abernathy looked confused. "But Mr. Caldwell, surely legal should handle—" "I said I will handle it." Ethan turned and walked to the window. He looked down at LaSalle Street, at the ants scurrying below. He remembered the feeling of the cold key on the counter 7 years ago. He remembered the silence of the empty account. He remembered the way the world had looked when he was on his knees. Now he was the one standing at the window. "Draft the letter, Abernathy," Ethan said, his back to the terrified executive, "and schedule a meeting. Tell Ms. Vance that the new ownership requires an in-person review of her portfolio. Don't tell her my name. Just tell her to come to the headquarters." "Yes, sir," Abernathy stammered and fled the room. Ethan looked down at the file in his hands. Vance Thorne. It wasn't just paper. It was a receipt for a stolen life. And finally, the bill was due. The envelope was heavy. It wasn't the flimsy, windowed paper of a utility bill. It was thick, cream-colored cardstock and with the embossed logo of Caldwell Holdings. It sat on the glass desk of Elena Vance's office at Lumina Gallery like a small, unexploded bomb. Elena stared at it. Her hands, manicured in a perfect shade of nude, were trembling just enough to be noticeable. She clasped them together to stop the motion. Across the room, Julian Thorne was lounging on a chaise, scrolling through his phone. He looked older than 37. The boyish charm that had once dazzled her was now puffy with alcohol and entitlement. He hadn't worked a real job in 2 years, ever since his consulting firm had quietly folded under allegations of misuse of funds. "Well," Julian drawled, not looking up, "what does the bank want? Another extension fee? Just pay it, El. We'll get the money from the spring auction." "There is no spring auction, Julian," Elena snapped, her voice thin. "We don't have the inventory, and we don't have the pitch." She picked up the letter opener, a silver blade that felt cold against her palm. She sliced the envelope open. The sound of tearing paper was violently loud in the quiet gallery. She unfolded the letter. The header was bold and uncompromising. Notice of acceleration and demand for immediate payment. Her eyes scanned the legal jargon, her breath hitching in her throat. Default under the terms of the promissory note. Breach of covenants. Entire principal balance of $2,400,000 due immediately. Foreclosure proceedings to commence within 30 days. "Julian," she whispered. "What?" "They called the loan. All of it." Julian sat up, finally dropping his phone. "They can't do that. Abernathy promised me." "Abernathy is gone," Elena read further down. "This is signed by the office of the CEO, Caldwell Holdings. Sterling Trust was bought out. We're not dealing with the bank anymore. We're dealing with a private equity firm." "So go talk to them," Julian said, standing up and pacing. He looked annoyed rather than afraid, a reaction that made Elena want to scream. "Put on that red dress, cry a little. Tell them we're pillars of the cultural community. These corporate types are all the same. They want to feel important, stroke their ego, and they'll give us another 6 months." Elena looked at him, really looked at him, and felt a wave of nausea. This was the man she had destroyed her life for. This was the man who had promised her the world, only to slowly, methodically dismantle the one she had built. She thought of Ethan. Ethan, who would have had a spreadsheet, a plan, a contingency. Ethan, who would never have let it get this far. "I have a meeting," Elena said, her voice hollow. "Tomorrow at 9:00 a.m. at 1 North Wacker." The next morning, the sky over Chicago was a slate gray, matching the churning in Elena's stomach. She stood in the lobby of 1 North Wacker, feeling impossibly small. The building was a monolith of glass and steel, a fortress of commerce that seemed to look down on her with contempt. She had followed Julian's advice, though she loathed herself for it. She was wearing her armor, a tailored Chanel suit, 4-inch heels, and diamond earrings that were, ironically, insured by the very bank she owed money to. She had spent an hour on her makeup, concealing the dark circles and the redness in her eyes. She looked like success. She felt like a fraud. "Name?" the security guard asked, not looking up from his screen. "Elena Vance. I have an appointment with the executive office." The guard checked his list. He paused, his eyebrows lifting slightly. "Oh, yes, you're cleared. Top floor. Private elevator bank on the left." Top floor. Lena walked to the elevator. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She checked her reflection in the polished metal doors. "You are Elena Vance," she told herself. "You are charming. You are persuasive. You can fix this." The elevator ride was smooth and silent, the numbers climbing higher and higher, leaving the noise of the city far below. Her ears popped. Ding. The doors slid open. She stepped out into a reception area that smelled of white tea and money. The floors were black marble. The walls were glass, offering a panoramic view of the city she was on the verge of losing. There was no clutter, no noise, just a terrifying, sterile perfection. A young woman sat behind a minimalist desk. She stood up immediately. "Ms. Vance, we've been expecting you." "I'm here to see whomever is in charge of the Sterling portfolio," Elena said, trying to keep her voice steady. "You're seeing the CEO," the assistant corrected gently. He handles special assets personally. Elena felt a fresh spike of fear. The CEO? For a loan default? It didn't make sense. Unless, unless they were planning to make an example of her. Right this way. The assistant led her down a long corridor. The silence was absolute. Elena's heels clicked sharply on the marble, the sound echoing like a countdown. They stopped in front of a massive pair of frosted glass doors. "He's waiting for you inside," the assistant said, opening the door. Elena took a breath. She smoothed her skirt. She put on her best smile, the one she used for donors, for critics, for the world that thought she was perfect. Just a bureaucrat, she thought. Just a man. I can handle a man. She stepped into the room. The office was vast, encased in glass that offered a 360-degree view of the city, yet it felt as airtight and pressurized as a deep-sea submersible. The air conditioning hummed with a low, expensive quiet. There were no family photos on the desk, no knickknacks, only a sleek laptop and a single, thick manila folder. Behind the desk, a high-backed leather chair was turned towards the window, facing away from her. The man sitting in it was silhouetted against the gray Chicago sky. "Mr. Caldwell?" Elena began, her voice practicing the confident lilt she had rehearsed in the elevator. She took a step forward, her heels sinking into the plush carpet. "I appreciate you seeing me on such short notice. I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding regarding the gallery's accounts. My partner and I—" "There is no misunderstanding," the man said. The voice stopped his cold. It wasn't loud, it wasn't angry, it was calm, precise, and achingly familiar. It was a voice she hadn't heard in 7 years, a voice she had convinced herself she had forgotten. The chair slowly swiveled around. Elena's purse slipped from her shoulder and hit the floor with a soft thud. She didn't reach for it. She couldn't move. Her breath caught in her throat, a sharp physical pain. Ethan sat there. But it wasn't the Ethan she remembered. The soft edges were gone. The slightly ill-fitting suits from Macy's were gone. The eager-to-please expression that used to annoy her was gone. This man was sharp and steel. His hair was shorter, graying slightly at the temples. His suit was bespoke, cut to perfection. But it was his eyes that terrified her. They looked at her not with love, not with hate, but with the cold, appraising stare of an auditor looking at a bad investment. "Ethan?" she whispered, the name feeling foreign on her tongue. "Hello, Elena," he said. He didn't stand up. He didn't smile. He gestured to the chair opposite him. "Sit down." She stumbled forward, her legs numb, and sank into the chair. I didn't know how—" "Caldwell Holdings acquired Sterling Trust 14 days ago," Ethan explained, his tone conversational, as if discussing the weather. "I reviewed the portfolio. I saw your name. You own the bank?" "I own the debt, Elena," he corrected gently. He opened the file in front of him. "And there is quite a lot of it." Elena felt a flush of heat rise up her neck. This was a nightmare. She was supposed to be charming a stranger, not begging her ex-husband. "Ethan, please. It's been so long. Can we not talk about this like strangers?" "We are strangers," Ethan said. He picked up a document from the folder. "Strangers with a contract, specifically a commercial loan agreement that is currently 90 days in default." "I can explain," Elena said, her voice trembling. "The market has been tough. Art isn't moving like it used to." Julian said. "I don't care what Julian said," Ethan cut in, looking up from the paper. "I care about the math, and the math says you are insolvent." He slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a spreadsheet, highlighted in yellow. "This is a breakdown of your operating expenses for the last year," Ethan said. "Row 4, $12,000 classified as client acquisition. That coincides with the dates of the Art Basel Festival in Miami. But you didn't have a booth at Basel, Elena. You stayed at the Four Seasons." Elena stared at the paper. We were networking." "Row 9, Ethan continued, ignoring her. $8,000, vehicle lease, a Range Rover, for a gallery in the city, or for Julian to drive to his golf club?" "Ethan, stop," she pleaded. Tears pricked her eyes, hot and humiliating. "Why are you doing this?" "I'm not doing anything," Ethan said calmly. "You spent the money. I'm just reading the receipt. We were happy. she blurted out, a desperate attempt to bridge the chasm between them. For a while we were happy. I'm sorry about how it ended, I am, but you can't punish me for wanting to be happy. Ethan finally leaned forward. The movement was small, but it sucked the air out of the room. Happy? He repeated. Elena, you emptied our joint account while I was sleeping. You took the down payment for our future children and used it to fund a startup for a man who has never finished a project in his life. I intended to pay it back, she lied. No, you didn't, Ethan said. You intended to erase me, and you almost did. He closed the file. But here we are, the narrative has changed. You aren't the victim anymore, Elena. You are a debtor, and I am the one holding the note. Elena looked at him, searching for a trace of the man who used to make her coffee in the morning, the man who used to hold her when she was anxious. He wasn't there. He had been replaced by this titan of industry, this stranger who knew her secrets, but felt none of her pain. What do you want? She whispered, defeated. I don't have the money, Ethan. You know I don't. Are you going to take the gallery? Is that it? Revenge? Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached for a pen. I don't want the gallery, he said. It's a liability, and I don't want revenge. Revenge is emotional. This is business. He wrote something on a notepad, tore off the sheet, and slid it toward her. I'm offering you a restructuring plan, he said. It will save your home. It will keep the gallery open. But the terms are specific. Elena looked at the paper. It wasn't a check. It was a list of conditions. Read them, Ethan commanded softly, and decide if your pride is worth more than your survival. Elena picked up the paper. Her hands were shaking so badly that the text seemed to vibrate. It wasn't a legal contract. It was a term sheet, concise and brutal in its simplicity. Condition 1, immediate liquidation of all non-essential assets, including but not limited to 2023 Range Rover, membership at the Chicago Club, and the lease on the secondary storage facility. Condition 2, monthly personal draw for Elena Vance capped at $4,000 until the principal balance is reduced by 20%. Condition 3, mandatory weekly financial auditing by a controller appointed by Caldwell Holdings. Elena felt a lump form in her throat. These terms didn't just restrict her, they grounded her. They stripped away the veneer of the high-flying socialite and reduced her to an employee on a stipend. It was livable, yes, but it was a gray, modest existence, the very existence she had left Ethan to escape. Then she read the final condition. Condition 4, Julian Thorne is to be immediately removed as a signatory on all accounts. He is barred from any operational role within Lumina Gallery. No company funds, directly or indirectly, are to be used for his compensation, expenses, or debts. Elena looked up, her face pale. Ethan, I can't do this. Julian is my partner. Julian is a parasite, Ethan said, his voice devoid of emotion. I've seen the books, Elena. He drains the accounts faster than you can fill them. If you keep him, the gallery fails in 3 months. If you cut him, you might survive. He lives with me, she whispered. If I cut off his access, if I sell the car, he'll leave. Ethan didn't blink. I know. The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Elena realized then that this wasn't about money. It was about the lie. For 7 years, she had convinced herself that her betrayal was justified because she had found a bigger love, a more exciting life. But looking at the paper, she saw the truth. She had traded a man who would have died for her for a man who was only there as long as the credit card worked. She looked at Ethan. He wasn't enjoying this. He wasn't gloating. He was simply waiting for her to make a rational decision, something she hadn't done in a decade. If I sign this, Elena asked, her voice breaking, will you forgive me? Ethan paused. He looked at the woman who had once been his entire world. He remembered the smell of her perfume, the sound of her laugh, the way she slept. But those memories felt like they belonged to someone else, a naive young man who no longer existed. Forgiveness implies that I'm still carrying the weight of it, Ethan said quietly. I'm not, Elena. I don't hate you. I don't love you. You're just a line item on a balance sheet that I need to resolve. The words hit her harder than any shout could have. Indifference, that was the true opposite of love. He hadn't spent 7 years pining for her. He had spent them outgrowing her. Elena looked down at the paper. She thought of Julian, waiting for her call, expecting her to fix it. She thought of the gallery, the only thing she had left that was truly hers. She picked up the pen. It felt heavy, like lead. With a trembling hand, she signed her name, Elena Vance. She pushed the paper back across the desk. Ethan took it. He didn't check the signature. He placed it back in the folder and closed it. "My assistant Sarah will handle the logistics," Ethan said. "She'll send a tow truck for the rover this afternoon." He stood up. It was a dismissal. Elena stood as well, her legs feeling unsteady. She clutched her purse to her chest, feeling stripped bare in her Chanel suit. "Ethan, I..." "Goodbye, Elena," he said, turning back to the window. She waited for a moment, hoping for something else, a glance, a nod, a crack in the armor. But there was nothing. Just the back of a man in a perfect suit, looking out at a city he had conquered. Elena turned and walked to the door. Her heels didn't click as loudly this time. She opened the door and stepped out into the hallway. As the heavy glass door hissed shut behind her, sealing her out of his world, Ethan Caldwell didn't turn around. He watched the gray clouds over Lake Michigan begin to break, revealing a sliver of cold, pale sunlight. He picked up his phone and dialed his assistant. "Sarah," he said, his voice steady and light. "The Vance file is closed. Archive it." "Yes, Mr. Caldwell. Anything else?" "No," Ethan said, watching the light hit the water. "That's all. I'm going home." He hung up the phone. The balance was restored, the debt was paid, and for the first time in 7 years, the account was truly settled.